Welcome to the Echoes of Ihsan podcast. Today we are diving deep into a fascinating collection of texts, Sunan Abu Dawud, specifically Book 16, Commercial Transactions.
Ah, yes, commercial transactions. That's a great one. I love reading that book.
Yeah, so this book really offers a sort of window into, like, the world of Islamic business ethics, a world where faith and finance really intersect. And I think this is something a lot of people are thinking about these days.
Oh yeah, absolutely. It's not just like following rules and regulations. It's really about like these are stories about the Prophet Muhammad. His encounters with merchants, his thoughts on debt and surety. There's even stuff in there about like where our food comes from.
I know, and what's really fascinating is how these stories they kind of like show us how to actually apply like these abstract concepts, these
Yeah,
Islamic principles to our lives, and especially in business and finance.
that's right. We're not just talking about like theory here. We're talking about practicality.
Yeah, I mean, one of the things that really kind of stood out to me was in Hadith 3320.
Hmm.
So in this Hadith, the Prophet he bumps into a group of brokers,
Hmm.
and it's kind of interesting. It's interesting how he sort of changes their job title,
Hmm.
right? Instead of calling them brokers, he refers to them as like a company of merchants, which is it's much more respectful,
Yeah.
right?
Oh yeah. And that subtle shift in language it's really important. It's like he's acknowledging their dignity, as professionals, regardless of like whatever society thinks of their job.
Right. It's really about like elevating the conversation.
Yeah. And what he says to them too, it's like he realizes that their line of work, it sometimes involves a lot of talk or even like swearing, which isn't that's not ideal,
Yeah.
from an Islamic perspective. So to kind of balance that out,
Yeah.
he tells them, incorporate sadaqah, give charity, incorporate that into your business dealings.
I love that. I love that concept. It's like even if your job involves stuff that's not ideal, right?
Mm.
You can kind of, purify your actions and your intentions through being generous and being socially responsible.
Yeah, and sadaqah, it's not just about giving money. It's a way of thinking. It's like using your wealth to help others. It's like acknowledging that wealth can be used to for yourself, but also for good.
Right. It's like a spiritual investment.
That's it.
I like that. Yeah.
And this idea of sadaqah being kind of intertwined with like, business ethics, it reminds me a lot of like how today we talk about corporate social responsibility, where businesses aren't just focused on profits, but they're thinking about their impact on the world, on society, on the environment,
It's
right?
like realizing that our financial actions they impact the world around us. And true success isn't just about how much money you make, but it's also about like how are you, impacting the community around you.
Yeah. Absolutely. Absolutely. It's about aligning your business practices with what you believe, with your values.
Yeah, I like that. That's really good. That's really good. So speaking of striking a balance, Hadith 3322, it tells us a story, and it's such a fascinating story about debt, surety, and finding wealth, unexpected wealth.
Mm.
And it's a story that really, I think, gives us an insight into, who the prophet was and how he viewed, ethical wealth, right?
Yeah, it's a real lesson, I think, in ethical decision making. It asks us, where does our wealth come from and how does that impact others? It's really deep.
Yeah, I mean, the story starts with this man he's in a lot of debt,
Right.
right? And he's like really stressed out because, his creditors are hounding him. And what's amazing is that the prophet steps in and he becomes the man's surety,
Right.
which means he's personally guaranteeing the repayment of the debt, which is, pretty incredible.
That's huge. I mean, just that act alone, it shows how much he cared about people, how much he wanted to help those in need, even if it meant, putting himself at risk financially.
Exactly.
Yeah.
It really shows how much we should be responsible for our community,
Well,
especially for those who are struggling, who are going through financial hardship.
it's like, we're not alone in this world. We're all connected and we have a responsibility to help those who are less fortunate.
Right. And the story it takes this really interesting turn because the man he comes back and he doesn't just come back with the 10 dinars that he owed, but
Wow.
he's found wealth, from a gold mine,
Right.
which, you would think great problem solved.
Right.
But this is where it gets really interesting, right? Because when the prophet hears about the source of the man's wealth, he says, "No, I'm not taking this.
Right.
I can't accept this," and that's kind of strange, right? Like why would he refuse?
Yeah, it's interesting. It's interesting because in Islam, it's not that gold is bad, it's the way you get it.
Hmm.
And in this case, the wealth came with no work, no real contribution. He just stumbled upon it.
So it's like there's a difference between wealth that you earn, that you work for, that you put effort into, versus wealth that just kind of falls into your lap.
Right. Exactly, exactly. And I think this is really important for us today, as we think about like how we invest, how we create wealth, where does it come from?
Right? It makes us think about the sources of our income and whether what we do actually benefits society.
Exactly. Exactly. It's like aligning your desire for money with your values, making sure that what you do, it doesn't just benefit you, but it helps the community around you.
Right. It's a good reminder. It's a good reminder that true wealth, it's more than just money. It's about the value that you create. It's about how you treat other people, and it's about aligning your actions with your
You
values.
got it. You got it. That's it. Yeah, it's about making sure that your pursuit of wealth doesn't, compromise your ethics, you know what I mean?
Right, exactly, exactly. And thinking about that, I think Hadiths 3325 and 3327, they talk about something that's always, been kind of a hot topic in Islam, usury.
Ah, yes. Riba, a
Yeah.
big one.
Yeah, and I've always been curious about that. Obviously Islam prohibits usury, riba, but I'd love to understand like why. Why is it so strictly prohibited? And like how does that apply to like our financial world today?
Well, the main reason usury is forbidden is it's all about justice,
Yeah.
It's about fairness, it's about compassion, it's about protecting those who are vulnerable from being taken advantage of,
Right.
and making sure that when we deal with money, it's a win-win, not one person winning and the other person losing.
Right, right. I mean, in these hadiths, the prophet's warnings about usury, they're pretty intense, right? Like
Yeah.
he even talks about like even if you try to avoid it, you might still be affected by it. Like
Wow.
it's in the air, you
It
know.
is. It's like this vapor, like
Yeah.
it's everywhere, and it can affect anyone, even those who aren't directly involved. It's a warning that a system hits on greed and taking advantage of others. It ultimately hurts everyone.
Yeah. And in Hadith 3327, it gets even more serious, right? Because the prophet, he actually curses those who engage in usury, which is, a really big deal, right?
Yeah, it's not something to be taken lightly, and it just shows how strongly Islam feels about any kind of financial transaction that exploits someone's needs or takes advantage of their vulnerability. It's got to be ethical, it's got to be fair, it's got to be a win-win.
So what actually is usury in Islam? What makes it different from the concept of interest that we have in modern finance?
Okay, so usury, it's basically when you charge excessive or exploitative interest on a loan. So it's not just about charging interest; it's about taking advantage of someone's hardship,
Yeah.
without actually taking on any risk yourself or contributing any real value.
So it's not just about like the act of charging interest, it's more about the intention behind it, right?
Exactly, you got it.
Like, is it fair? Is it reflective of the actual risk involved, or are you just, exploiting someone who's in a desperate situation?
Yeah, yeah, that's it. It's about making sure that both parties they're getting something out of the deal, that it's fair, it's balanced.
Right. And how does that, I mean, it's kind of a big question, but how does that apply to like the financial systems that we have today, right?
Yeah.
Because a lot of the modern economy is based on lending and interest. So how do we like reconcile those two things?
Well, I think this hadith it's asking us to really look closely at how finance works today, and see if there are any places where these principles of usury might be at play. You know what I'm saying?
So are there instances where the interest rates are just too high, or are there lending practices that are more about profit than about the well-being of the people involved?
Yeah. Those are some good questions. I mean, maybe this hadith is telling us, let's explore different ways of doing things. Like Islamic finance, for example, which focuses on ethical considerations.
So it's about finding solutions that are more fair, more just, more compassionate.
Exactly. That's it.
Yeah. Okay, so let's shift gears a little bit and talk about something a little bit more personal.
Okay.
In Hadith 3326, it's a story about the prophet. Um, and he's eating a meal, and it kind of shows how even in the smallest things, he was always very careful about doing things the right way, you know, about being ethical.
Yeah, it's amazing, isn't it? It's like these principles, they're not just for like big, life decisions. They're for everything.
Yeah. So what's the story? What happened?
Okay, so the prophet, he was coming back from a funeral and he was invited to have dinner at this woman's house. And as he's eating, he's eating the meat and he notices something about the taste.
Like, what was it about the taste?
He says, this meat, it tastes like a sheep that might have been taken without permission. So he's immediately thinking, where did this meat come from? Is this halal?
Right. And that's incredible that he can tell that just from the taste.
I know, right?
It shows how aware he was, how careful he was about where his food came from.
Yeah, it's a really, really powerful lesson in being mindful,
Yeah.
about paying attention to the details of our actions. Even something as simple as eating, we should be thinking about where our food comes from, making sure it's been acquired ethically and lawfully.
Right, right. So what happened? What happened next? Did the woman explain like where she got the sheep from?
Yeah, so she says, I tried to buy a sheep from the market, but there weren't any. And she says, my neighbor, he just bought a sheep, so I went to him and I wanted to buy it from him, but I couldn't find him. So I sent a message to his wife and she sent me the sheep.
So it's possible that the neighbor's wife gave her the sheep without her husband knowing.
Exactly. Exactly. And that doubt, that lack of clear permission, that's what bothered the prophet. Even though the woman, she might not have intentionally taken the sheep, that uncertainty, it made it unacceptable.
So it's a lesson in transparency, right?
Yeah.
And being really careful about where things come from.
Yes, you got it. It's about taking responsibility, for the things that we consume, not just closing our eyes and hoping for the best.
Right, right. And that's really hard, I think,
It,
especially the world we live in today. Like it's so hard to know like where our food comes from.
it is. It is. But I think this hadith is encouraging us to at least try, to ask questions, to support businesses that are honest and transparent.
To be conscious consumers, right?
Yeah, exactly.
To use our purchasing power to make a difference.
Yeah. And this also brings in the whole concept of halal, right? Which is, it's not just about the type of food, but it's about how you get it.
Yeah.
Making sure it's lawful and pure and ethically sourced.
It's about making sure that our consumption is in line with our spiritual values,
Yeah.
right? Not just about satisfying our physical needs.
You got it.
Yeah. Okay. So moving on, Sunan Abu Dawud, Book 16, it has all these rulings, all these recommendations for conducting trade. Hadiths 3328, 3330, 3331, 3334, 3343, 3345, 3343, 353, 334. It's like this blueprint for doing business the right way.
Yeah, it covers so much, doesn't it? It's amazing. Weights and measures, exchanging goods, currencies, and it all boils down to being clear, being fair, and avoiding problems,
Mhm.
avoiding disputes.
Yeah, I mean, for example, Hadith 3328 talks about abolishing any claims to usury from before Islam,
Right.
which is like setting this new standard for financial dealings.
Yep. It's like a clean slate. It's
Yeah.
it's moving from a system that maybe tolerated exploitation to one that's all about justice.
Right, right. And then there's Hadiths 3330 and 33331, and these are kind of cute. They tell this story about the prophet buying trousers. He tells the seller to like give more than what's due when measuring for payment. It's like go above and beyond.
Yeah, it's a great example of generosity,
Yeah.
and going the extra mile. It's about making the customer feel valued.
And those little acts of kindness, they really can make a difference, right? They build trust.
Absolutely. It's all about creating that positive energy.
Yeah. And Hadith 3334, it talks about standardized weights and measures for trade.
Right.
Which is about being consistent, being fair.
Yeah.
It's like a level playing field, so no one gets cheated.
Exactly. It's all about transparency.
Hmm.
Making sure everyone knows what's going on.
Yeah, and then Hadith 3343, it goes into exchanging different kinds of goods like gold, silver, wheat, dates, salt, and it says, like with like equal weight and measure for similar things.
Right. So it's about making sure that the value is fair.
Yeah.
That one person isn't getting a better deal at the expense of the other.
Right. Yeah. And Hadiths 3345 and 3348, they talk about different currencies and the importance of settling transactions like right away.
Yeah, it's about avoiding confusion,
Mm.
about making sure that everybody knows what they're getting into and that the 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 deal is done, in a timely manner.
Yeah, yeah. And then 3350 and 3354, those hadiths go into trading animals and dates, and they say, you can't sell an animal and then get paid later, and you can't trade fresh dates for dry dates if you're going to get paid later.
Yeah.
It's like there's these specific rules to prevent people from being taken advantage of.
Right. And it shows how much detail, how much thought went into these teachings.
Yeah, yeah. It's amazing, isn't it, how specific it is. Like it covers pretty much everything you could think of.
It does. It does. It's a guide, for how to do business ethically.
Yeah, yeah. And I think, to bring this back to our listeners to like today's world, like think about online marketplaces
Hmm.
like Amazon or eBay where reviews and ratings, they're so important, for building trust.
That's a great point. It's like the modern day equivalent of having a good reputation, you
Yeah,
know?
right. Or like fair trade certifications,
Yeah,
They
right.
make sure that the products are sourced ethically and that the workers are treated fairly.
Absolutely. Absolutely. That's a perfect example of how these principles can be applied in the modern world.
Yeah, so it shows that, even though the world has changed so much, these principles, they're still relevant. They're still important.
They are. They are. It's about taking these timeless values, and applying them to the challenges that we face today.
Right, right. And always striving for that Ihsan,
Yeah.
that's striving for excellence in everything that we do.
Exactly. Exactly. That's what it's all about.
Okay, so let's move on to something that's always, a bit heavy, I guess, death and what happens to our financial dealings when we die, what happens in the afterlife.
Yeah, it's not the most, cheerful topic to talk about, but it's important to think about, right? It's part of the whole picture.
And Hadiths 3335 and 3336, they really paint a pretty bleak picture of what can happen if you die in debt.
Hmm.
Like Hadith 3335, it says that one of the companions of the prophet, he was prevented from entering paradise because he had an outstanding debt.
Yeah, it's a reminder that our financial obligations, they don't just disappear when we die. They
Mhm.
they they matter. They have consequences.
Right,
Mhm.
right. And in Hadith 3336, it says that dying with debt is one of the most serious sins.
It is.
Like it's a really big deal.
Yeah, it emphasizes how important it is to be responsible with our finances, to live within our means, to avoid unnecessary debt, and to make sure we fulfill our commitments.
Right, right. It's a little bit scary.
Yeah.
But then there's Hadith 3337, and that Hadith shows how compassionate the prophet was, because he actually took on the debts of believers who had died.
Yeah, it's an incredible act of kindness, and it shows how much he cared about their well-being even after they were gone.
It's a beautiful example of community, and taking care of each other even in death.
It is. It is. It's
Yeah.
it's it's really powerful.
So what is the Islamic perspective on settling debts before you die? Like what's the importance of that, and what role does the community play in helping people do that?
So in Islam, it's really important to settle your debts before you die. It's seen as a way of ensuring that your transition into the afterlife is smooth.
Yeah.
That there aren't any burdens holding you back. It's about leaving this world with a clear conscience.
So it's about taking responsibility for your actions and not leaving a burden on other people.
Exactly. Exactly. It's about respect for yourself and for those you leave behind.
Right, right. And the community plays a role in this, right?
Absolutely. It's about helping those who are struggling with debt, offering support, maybe financial assistance, advice. It's about everyone looking out for each other.
So it's about this kind of shared responsibility.
Yeah, it's a beautiful example of how Islamic teachings, they promote solidarity. We're all
Yes.
in this together, in this life, and in preparing for the next.
Right. It's a good reminder. It's a good reminder. So as we continue looking at Sunan Abu Dawud, book 16, we see these hadiths that outline some prohibitions, in business practices.
Right.
So we're talking about hadith 3363, 3365, 3366, 3367, 3368, and 3376, and they deal with things like selling unripe fruit, or forcing people into contracts, or selling things that have hidden defects.
Right, right. And these prohibitions, they show just how much attention to detail there is in Islamic teachings when it comes to fairness and doing business ethically. Each one of these prohibitions addresses a situation where someone could be taken advantage of, where there could be deception or uncertainty, and that could lead to conflict, to harm. Okay, so let's break down some of these prohibitions and really understand the thinking behind them. In Hadith 3363, it forbids a bunch of things. It says, you can't sell spoils of war before they've been distributed. You can't sell palm trees before you know they're safe from disease, and even praying without tying your belt properly.
Mm-hmm.
It's an interesting mix.
It is.
But there seems to be like a common thread running through all of them.
Yeah, you're absolutely right. The common thread is uncertainty. It's about incompleteness. So selling spoils of war before they've been properly allocated, that could lead to arguments, to unfairness,
Mm-hmm.
and selling palm trees before you know if they're actually healthy and going to produce fruit. Well, that puts the buyer at risk, right? It could lose money.
Right.
And even praying without your belt being tied properly, it shows a lack of completeness. It's like you're not fully present. And that can affect the quality of your prayer.
Right. It's about doing things the right way, the complete way, and avoiding any potential harm or confusion, right?
Exactly. It's about approaching everything with clarity, with intention, with a focus on doing things properly, ethically.
Yeah. Okay, so Hadith 3365 and 3366, they talk about selling fruit. They say, you can't sell grapes before they're ripe, and you can't sell grain before it's hardened. And it seems to be about making sure that what you're selling is actually good quality.
Absolutely. You don't want to sell people something that's going to disappoint them.
Right.
It's about making sure that the transaction is fair. That the product is actually worth the price.
It's like a quality control, right? Making sure that the customer is getting what they paid for.
That's a great way to put it. Yeah. It's about building trust.
Yeah. Okay. So then Hadith 3367, it kind of builds on this, and it says that you can only sell fruit for dinars or dirhams,
Mm-hmm.
except for this one specific type of transaction called a raya. And it's interesting that it links the sale of fruit to specific currencies, right?
Yeah.
Like it's important to be clear about how you're paying.
Yeah, if you're bartering, if you're using like strange forms of payment, it can lead to confusion, to disagreements. Like what's the value of this thing that I'm trading? But if you stick to dinars or dirhams, well, everybody knows what that means.
It's about everyone being on the same page.
Exactly. It's about transparency. It's about making sure that the transaction is smooth, that it's clear, that there's no room for exploitation.
Right. And then Hadith 3368, it talks about selling fruit years in advance.
Yeah.
And it says you can't do that.
Yeah.
And it emphasizes that if there are any losses, because of things like natural disasters, like a blight, those losses have to be forgiven. And it's acknowledging that, agriculture, it's risky.
It is. Yeah, you're dealing with the forces of nature,
Right. And this hadith is protecting both the buyer and the seller from potential losses that are outside of their control.
Yeah, it's about sharing the risk. It's about being fair. It's about working together.
Yeah. So it's fostering this sense of partnership, right,
Yeah.
in these agricultural transactions.
Absolutely.
Okay. And then finally, Hadith 3376, it talks about forced contracts. And it says, no, you can't do that. You can't force people into agreements. And it really emphasizes that people need to enter into these agreements freely, willingly. And they need to know what they're getting into.
Yeah, it's all about protecting people from being taken advantage of, making sure that all parties are entering into the agreement with their eyes wide open, with their full consent.
Right. So it's about creating a business environment where everyone is treated with respect, where agreements are reached through communication and understanding.
Exactly. Exactly. It's about upholding justice, about fairness. It's about making sure that the marketplace is a place where people can do business ethically, where everyone benefits.
Yeah. It's a good reminder. It's a good reminder that ethical business practices, they're not just about following rules. They're about a set of values,
Right.
that promote fairness and trust and mutual respect.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
It's about creating a world where business is a force for good.
Hmm. Yeah. Yeah, it's amazing how these Islamic principles, they really provide this framework
Mhm.
for how to do business in a way that's ethical and fair and socially responsible.
It is. It is. It's really inspiring.
So let's talk about the concept of partnership and profit.
Yeah.
And we can look at Hadith 3377, 3378, and 3380. And these hadiths seem to suggest that if you're ethical in your business, it can actually attract divine favor,
Yep.
like God's blessings.
Right. These hadiths are all about the spiritual side of business. They show that being ethical, it's not just about avoiding bad things happening. It's about attracting good things. It's about baraka.
And Hadith 3377, it has this really powerful message from Allah, and it says that he actually becomes a third partner in a business venture as long as the partners are honest with each other.
Right.
But if one of them cheats the other, then Allah withdraws His blessings.
Yeah.
It's a pretty strong message.
It is. It shows that spirituality and material success, they're connected. It's about realizing that success isn't just about how hard you work, but it's also about aligning yourself with divine principles.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It's like inviting God into your business,
Yeah.
by being honest and having integrity, being fair.
Exactly. That's it.
Yeah. And then Hadiths 3378 and 3380, they tell these really interesting stories about successful business deals.
Yeah.
Like in Hadith 3378, the Prophet gives this companion a dinar to buy a sacrificial animal. And the companion, he ends up buying 2 sheep, selling one for a dinar, and then coming back to the Prophet with a sheep and the original dinar.
Right.
And the Prophet is so impressed by this,
Yeah.
by his cleverness and his honesty, that he actually prays for him to be successful.
Yeah, and it shows how powerful it is to be ethical,
Yeah.
to be trustworthy, to be resourceful, to keep your promises.
So it's like every transaction, every deal, it's an opportunity to be ethical, right?
Yes.
And to attract those blessings.
Ab-
Yeah. And Hadith 3380, it tells a similar story about a companion who manages the Prophet's money really well, turns a dinar into a profit, while being honest and transparent. And the Prophet, again, he sees his integrity, he sees his business skills, and he prays for him to continue to be successful.
It's such a beautiful example of how ethical conduct, when you combine that with skill, it can lead to amazing results.
So success in business isn't just about being lucky or being clever. It's about having those values
That's it.
and aligning yourself with those divine principles. Right?
Absolutely. It's about recognizing that true prosperity, it's not just about the money, it's about spiritual well-being as well.
Right. Right. So I guess thinking about this, I think it's a good opportunity for our listeners to reflect on their own experiences. Like have you noticed a connection between your actions, the way you do things, and the results that you get?
Yeah. Have you felt that, Barack? That feeling of things just working out when you're doing the right thing, when you're being honest.
Right. Right. It's kind of like it's like a reminder to pay attention to the spiritual side of success.
Yeah, it's about recognizing that there's more to life than just the material things.
Yeah. Okay. So let's move on to something that's a bit more I guess controversial.
Okay.
Sharecropping and leasing land, and we could look at hadiths 3383, 3384, 3384, 3387, 3387, 3393, 3394, 3395, and 3396, and these hadiths they talk about how tricky these arrangements can be.
Yeah.
And they really emphasize the importance of having clear agreements, having fair agreements to prevent people from being taken advantage of.
Right. And what's interesting is that these hadiths, they show different perspectives perspectives on sharecropping, right?
Right.
Like some hadiths suggest that it was okay at first, but then it became, less favored. It was better to lend money or to hire someone for a fixed wage.
Right.
But then other hadiths, they give specific conditions for when sharecropping might be okay.
So there's this kind of evolution, right, of
Yeah.
how it's viewed.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly. And it shows that Islamic rulings, they're not static, They change and they adapt to address new situations and to make sure that everything is fair.
Right. Like in Hadith 3383, it talks about how Ibn Umar, he didn't see anything wrong with sharecropping at first until he heard a hadith from Rafiz ibn Khadiz that said the Prophet had actually forbidden it.
Right.
And that's really interesting.
Yeah. It shows how Islamic law, it's dynamic, it's based on dialogue, on new information.
Mm-hmm. Okay, so Hadiths 3384 and 3385, they kind of get into the reasons why sharecropping was discouraged. So in 3384, there's this story about two people arguing over a sharecropping agreement, and the Prophet tells them, it's better to avoid this kind of thing.
Right. It was causing too many problems, too many disputes. It was too easy for one party to take advantage of the other.
Right. And in 3385, it says that the Prophet forbade leasing land for a share of the produce. Instead he said you should lease it for a fixed amount of gold or silver.
Right.
And that makes sense, right?
Yeah.
Because if you have a fixed payment, then it's clear, it's predictable, it's fair.
Exactly. It eliminates the uncertainty, the potential for someone to get a raw deal.
Yeah. And then Hadiths 3391, 3393, 3394, 3395, and 3396, they all kind of emphasize how important it is to have clear agreements and to pay fair wages when it comes to cultivating land.
Right. They discourage, using someone else's land without permission. They say, you have to pay people fairly for their work, and they condemn any practices that kind of resemble usury, where one person is benefiting unfairly.
Right. It's really about justice and fairness and making sure that everyone is treated with respect.
Absolutely. It's about recognizing that we're all connected, that our actions have an impact on others.
Yeah. Yeah. And I think this really connects with the conversations that are happening today, about fair labor practices and using land responsibly.
It does. It asks us to really look at who has power in these agricultural systems, and to make sure that those who are working the land are treated fairly, that they're paid fairly.
Right. And to think about the environment, to make
Mhm.
sure that the way we use land is sustainable.
Yeah, it's about recognizing that our choices, they have consequences, not just for us, but for the planet, for future generations.
It's about that Ihsan, right? That striving for excellence in everything that we do,
Yeah,
in our relationship with the land, in our relationship with the people who work the land.
exactly. It's about aligning our actions with those principles of justice and fairness and sustainability.
Yeah. Okay, so to wrap up our deep dive into Sunan Abu Dawud, Book 16, Commercial Transactions,
Mhm.
let's look at this really fascinating story about Abdullah ibn Rawaha assessing the date harvest in Khaybar. And these are hadiths 30406, 3407, and 3408. And these hadiths show how important it is to be fair and transparent when you're managing resources, when you're distributing resources.
Right. These hadiths they're like a masterclass in how to handle resources in a way that's equitable,
So in Hadith 3406, it says that the Prophet would send Abdullah ibn Rawaha to Khaybar to estimate the amount of dates even before they were ripe. And this allowed them to figure out how much zakat should be paid. Zakat, that's the obligatory charity in Islam. So it's about planning ahead, right?
It is. It's about being proactive, about making sure that the community's needs are met, that religious obligations are fulfilled.
Right. And Hadith 3407, it explains that, when the Prophet conquered Khaybar, he let the Jewish people who lived there stay on the land, and they could continue to farm it, but they had to share the harvest with the Muslims.
Right.
And Abdullah ibn Rawaha, he was the one who was tasked with assessing the harvest, to make sure it was fair.
Yeah. It shows how just the Prophet was, allowing the original inhabitants to stay and benefit from the land, but also making sure that the resources were shared fairly.
Right. So it's about peace, right?
Yeah.
It's about coexistence. It's about making sure that everyone has has what they need.
Absolutely. It's about creating a system that works for everyone.
Yeah. And then Hadith 3408 gives us a specific example. It says that Abdullah ibn Rawaha, he assessed the date harvest at 40,000 wasks. And that just shows the level of detail, the level of care that went into making sure that the division of the harvest was transparent and fair.
Yeah. It's all about expertise.
Mm-hmm.
It's about accuracy.
Mm-hmm.
Having clear guidelines so that everyone can trust the system, so that everyone feels like they're being treated fairly.
Right, right. And this story, it's so relevant today, as we think about how resources are allocated, how they're managed,
Yeah.
like do our systems ensure that everyone benefits? Do they ensure that the people who actually produce those resources, get their fair share?
Yeah, it's a challenge for us today,
Yeah.
to make sure that our systems are just, that they're equitable, that they're sustainable.
Right. And again, it goes back to that Ihsan, that striving for excellence in how we manage our resources, how we share them.
Absolutely.
Absolutely.
Hmm.
So it's been an incredible journey, through Sunan Abu Dawud, Book 16 commercial transactions. We've uncovered so much wisdom, so much guidance on how to do business in a way that's ethical and fair,
Yeah. We've covered so much ground, from the basics of honesty and transparency to the complexities of partnerships and debt and managing resources.
And what's amazing is that these teachings, these principles, they're just as relevant today, as they were centuries ago. Like
Yeah.
like think about the challenges that we face today with ethical consumption, with fair labor practices, with using land responsibly, with making sure that resources are shared fairly. These are all things that Islam has something to say about.
It does. It does. It offers solutions. It reminds us that being ethical, it's not just about being a good person. It's about building a better world.
Right, right. So as we wrap up this deep dive, we really encourage you to think about that concept of Ihsan,
Yeah.
that striving for excellence, that commitment to doing what's right.
Yeah. Bring those values, of honesty, of integrity, of compassion, of fairness. Bring them into everything you do, into your work, into your finances.
And let's try to build a world, where business is a force for good,
Mhm.
where it benefits everyone.
Yeah.
Thank you for joining us on this exploration of Islamic business ethics. We really hope that you found it insightful and that it gave you some things to think about.
May these teachings inspire us all, to strive for excellence in everything that we do, and to create a world where business is a blessing for ourselves and for the whole community.